There we go. Let's get started. We're broadcasting live on YouTube. So if you're watching there, well done. Thanks for finding us. We're called e2language.com. My name is Jay. This lecture is on IELTS speaking. It's called Towards IELTS 9 because I believe it's possible to get IELTS 9 or thereabouts if you understand how to do this test correctly, this part of the test. I've done it. I got a 9, and I think you can get close to, if not a 9 yourself. What you have to think about is how this test is constructed. They describe it in IELTS as the introduction and interview, the long turn and the discussion, but this is incorrect. You should think about it like small talk, tell a great story, and discuss big ideas. These are the 3 sections of the test that you need to do, right? So part 1 is small talk. What's going to happen is the IELTS examiner is going to call your name. You're going to walk down a corridor, probably go into a classroom or some sort of room, sit down, look at the examiner. He or she is going to look at your passport, then ask you some simple questions, and you need to small talk. The only key to this one is that you need to elaborate. What does that mean? It means you need to extend your answers. Don't give single word answers to the examiner. Talk, reply in sentences, interesting sentences. For example, she might ask you where you're from. Don't just say Australia. Say, I'm from a small town in the southern part of Victoria in Australia. Something like that. Use adjectives, use interesting words, capture her attention right from the beginning. Do you work or are you a student? You should answer by saying good answers, such as, yes, I currently work for e2language.com, which is an online platform that prepares people for IELTS, TOEFL, OET, etc. In other words, extend your answers. Then what will happen is the examiner is going to change the subject and ask you some question that will sound strange because it's not following a logical progression. She might ask you, where's your favorite tourism destination? And you need to think quickly in order to answer her. And so you'll say, well, I particularly like the 12 Apostles on the Great Ocean Road in the southern part of Australia. Good, not a one-word answer. Give her multiple words, longer answers. Then she'll say something like, have you been to any local tourist attractions? And you can say, well, yes, blah, blah, blah. Again, you understand it. Just be careful about that change of topic there. In part 2, you need to tell a story, okay? This is the most difficult part because it's unnatural. The examiner is going to give you a task card, and on that task card is a topic. You'll have 1 minute to prepare, then you have 2 minutes to speak, to do a monologue, okay? This is not an interaction. It's just you speaking to the examiner. In the 1 minute preparation time, you should just think. I don't think there's enough time to write anything down. You should just look at your task card, understand it, think about the story you're going to tell. Because you need to tell a great story, an interesting story. And to tell a great story, you need to embellish. That means that you may not be telling the truth, but the truth in IELTS speaking is beside the point. The purpose is to express yourself articulately and use interesting language. To use interesting language, you may have to embellish, which is to add untrue details, right? So this story you come up with can be a real story, but you can add additional details that are actually not true. That's fine. You should also digress, which means you need to leave the main topic of the conversation temporarily. In other words, let me show you. It's better to visualize this through my task card. This is the task card that I got given on test day. And you can just go like this. You have 1 minute to prepare, 2 minutes to speak. If you just speak quickly and answer it without digressing, you'll finish in 30 seconds. And that's not good, right? What you need to do is you need to digress. You need to talk about the task card, but you need to go off topic, then come back, then go off topic, then come back, then go off topic, then come back, etc. Like that. This is how you speak for 2 minutes on a topic. Digressing. So my task card said, talk about a time you were recently angry. You should say who or what made you angry, where and when it was, how angry you were, and explain whether or not it was resolved, and if so, how. So in that 1 minute, I sat there and I thought, right, I've got a story. It's a boring story. I'm going to have to add some untrue details to make this story interesting and to use interesting language as a result. Right, I'm going to give you a chance to try. Here's a boring task card. You need to tell a great story looking at this boring task card. I want you to describe a modern building. You should say where it is, what it's used for, and why you like or dislike it, and talk about the last time you visited it. You don't need to talk directly about this. You can go off topic. That's fine. This task card is just there to guide you, but you should go through these dot points nevertheless. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to prepare, to think of a great story, and 2 minutes to tell your great story. Okay? I'm going to time you. I'll tell you how long you have. So your time to prepare starts now. That's 30 seconds, 30 seconds more to prepare. Remember, you can digress, you should embellish, and you must elaborate for 2 minutes. Just relax. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and start. It's 30 seconds, a minute and a half left. It's 1 minute, 1 minute left. Thirty seconds left. Three, two, one, and that's 2 minutes. Cool. How did you go? I hope you spoke for 2 minutes. You should get up there to a minute 45 at least. At the 2 minute mark, the examiner will stop you. even if you're midway through a sentence, this is not a bad thing. They're not stopping you because you're boring or they dislike what you're saying. They're stopping you because you've reached 2 minutes and you must stop, okay? Then it will transition into the third part. But before we transition, I think I should do an example of telling a great story, as great as I possibly can, using this task card, okay? And listen to the way that I embellish, add untrue details, and especially the way that I digress, go off topic and then come back to topic. So my time starts now. Today I would like to talk about a modern building located to the south of Melbourne in a suburb called Southbank, which is a particularly ugly suburb in Melbourne. I dislike modern buildings in general. I much prefer old architecture with the beautiful engravings and facades. As I said, this particular building is in Southbank, which is full of modern apartment buildings which lack any decorative features. It's an apartment building for residents. So it's about 24 stories high and it's full of people who live there, students, people who work in the city, people who like to be close to the city, and perhaps they live there because of its practical purposes. I don't think I'd like to live in a building that just serves practical purposes because I enjoy nice aesthetics, for example. As I said, I dislike it because this particular building is boring and plain and does not suit its surrounding environment, because Melbourne is a beautiful city and there are many beautiful places in Melbourne, but Southbank represents sort of modernity and particularly boring architecture. The last time I visited this building was about 2 weeks ago, and why I'm mentioning this particular building is because my brother lives there. My brother has very different tastes than me, and that's probably why he chose to live in such a building. He prefers practicality over beauty. So that's what I'd like to speak about today, is the modern building in Southbank and the reasons why I dislike it. And I finished at 1 minute and 55 seconds. Now, what did I do? This is a difficult task card because it's boring. What am I going to talk about? Well, I went off topic because the only way that I can stretch this out to 2 minutes is to do this. Talk about Southbank and how boring it is. Talk about how beautiful Melbourne is. Talk about how I like nice architecture, but I dislike bad architecture. Talk about the residents and why they live there for practical purposes. I'm going off topic. I'm coming back to the topic. I'm talking about the theme, but I'm just digressing. Cool? Cool. I hope that gives you an idea about how to do this task. You might also notice that I used interesting language. I used the word decorative. I used the word aesthetic. I extended my vocabulary so I could show the examiner that I understand these words and I can use these words. Right. Part 3, you need to discuss big ideas, okay? It's now going to transition from part 2 to part 3 very quickly. The examiner will say, now I'm going to ask you some questions. And the questions are going to be complex. You need to elaborate. Again, you need to extend your answers. You need to embellish. You can add untrue details. Your answers do not need to be true. They just need to show your language skills. Importantly, you need to be thoughtful. You need to give interesting answers. Let me explain why. Interesting ideas or abstract ideas will get you a top score. Boring ideas, basic ideas will get you a low score. Why is that? It's because language must follow ideas. The language must attend the ideas. So if you have boring ideas, you're going to use basic language. If you have interesting ideas, you're going to have to express them using interesting language. So to get to the top of the pyramid, to get to the IELTS 9, you have to have great ideas and you have to have the language that can come with those ideas to express it. All right? In short, abstract ideas is abstract language. So what happened to me? Well, this was my task card about being angry. And the questions that the examiner asked me were questions like, how can you control anger? And I gave her interesting, thoughtful, elaborate answers, right? I drew upon my knowledge of whatever I'd read in the last 5 years, and I talked to her about that. She asked me, what do you think about the mind-body relationship? And I talked to her about neuroscience, and I talked to her about this and that, and I gave her some great answers. And as such, because they were interesting answers, I used interesting language. Now, what you have to do is the discussion questions will be related to your task card. So it's going to be about modern buildings or architecture or something like that. I want you to speak for about 30 seconds on each question. I want you to answer the question, but I want you to be interesting and thoughtful, okay? So question 1, 30 seconds. I'm going to change this. I'm going to ask you, what do you think of modern architecture? Starting now. Cool, that's 30 seconds. So you should have given an extended, interesting answer and maybe drawn upon your, what do you really think about modern architecture? Maybe you would compare modern architecture to old architecture, something like that. But you'd give an as interesting as possible answer, all right? Second question. Again, 30 seconds, elaborate and be interesting. Would you rather live in a house or an apartment? All right, that's 30 seconds. Obviously, you cannot answer by just saying apartment or house. You need to answer why and give an interesting reason why. You might talk about the size, you might talk about practicality, you might talk about cost, something like that. Proximity to the city, you need to use interesting vocabulary and correct grammar. Last one, 30 seconds. As the world's population increases, what do you think will happen to housing? Now you need to think about possibilities and future scenarios. Your time starts now. Cool, that's 30 seconds. So what would I say here? So the world's population increases, what do you think happened to housing? I'll say something like, obviously, as the world's population increases, we can't spread outwards. We'll have to go upwards. And that means that we're going to have to live increasingly in apartment buildings. It also means that apartment buildings are going to have to become taller and taller. This is a good thing. It will stop urban sprawl and it will result in high apartment buildings with better functionality. Something like that. That's how I would have answered this question. Cool. Right, well done. You've just done an IELTS speaking. Let me talk to you about the criteria or what the examiner is listening for. The examiner is listening for 5 things. Fluency, how smoothly you speak, not quickly. Fluency does not mean you speak quickly. It means you speak without hesitating, without umming and ahhing, without restarting sentences, without searching for language to express yourself. That's what fluency means, that words appear instantaneously, immediately in your mind, and you can express things. Structure. They listen for the way that you structure your talk, especially especially with part 2, when you need to tell that great story. So your story should follow those dot points, and you should structure your talk as such. Vocabulary, they want to hear sophisticated vocabulary that expresses the things you're thinking about. Okay, not basic vocabulary. And remember that good ideas have good vocabulary attached to them. Boring ideas have boring vocabulary. Grammar, you need to fit the vocabulary into the correct grammar, and you need to pronounce clearly. You may need to speak slightly slower than usual. You need to sound native-like, or at least be understood easily by the examiner. Cool. While I've got you, let me just tell you how to prepare for IELTS. If you're struggling, or if you've never taken it, or if you need help, I strongly recommend that you go to www.e2language.com. Why? Because we offer the best online IELTS course available. It starts with a study plan, a personalized study plan, where you meet with the teacher like me one-on-one, and we talk to you about your weaknesses, your strengths, and what you need to do to get to IELTS, the IELTS score you need. On the website, we have grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation practice to build your basic skills. We also have methods, tips, and strategy classes for all of the IELTS tasks and questions, including writing task 1, writing task 2, reading, etc. Heaps of practice exercises, one-on-one tutorials with the teacher, as well as writing feedback and speaking feedback. And we do live mock tests like this one here. That's how you get to IELTS success. So I might leave it there, and thank you very much for coming.